Welcome back to Cinema Flicks Music Picks. I'm Davey, your host with the most, the beast with the least. Least we can do today is continue on with Jimmy Stewart month. It's a wonderful month indeed, and we're nearly a third of the way through already. So we're going to be having a look at the 1947 film called Northside 477. This being a German Blu-ray of said feature. So Jimmy Stewart, of course, stars with a relatively young Richard Conte, still to make his breakthrough performances in the film Noirs that would define his career, and Lee J. Cobb, who would be a character actor of note until he died at the age of about 56 in the late 60s. You won't believe it, but Lee J. Cobb in this film is the same age that I am now. He could easily pass for 60. Hope I don't look 60. Maybe a young 59. Anyway, the story of the film concerns a young. So we're in the gangster era in Chicago. Al Capone, the Untouchables, Elliot Ness. We're in that era, but it doesn't glamorise anything like a lot of films do. We see a speakeasy being run from the back of a convenience store, and a policeman has gone down in there. A young Polish man is arrested for the crime, along with one of the men who actually did commit the crime, and convicted. We aren't sure because we don't see his face, the assailant's face at the start. We're unsure whether or not Richard Conte should be convicted. But cut to 11 years later, they say it quite a lot, 11 years later, and a notice appears in the paper, the Chicago Times, of which Jimmy's working. He plays McNeil. It's based on a true story as well. Only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And McNeil has called into his editor's office, the editor played by the 36-year-old Lee J. Cobb. He must have been eating cigarettes for breakfast, pint of cream for lunch. But he's told, look at this weird advert that's running today in the want ads, and it's $5,000 award for information regarding the murder of police officer Bundy 11 years ago. And the editor says, who would be offering $5,000 for an 11-year-old murder when we've already got 2 people locked up for it? Go and investigate. Jimmy Stewart thinks, okay, it's just a public interest story, we'll find some cook. So he goes and visits the personal place they had. It's a lovely older lady, an old Polish lady, and she's been saving all her money for 11 years to raise this amount to make it profitable for someone to come forward, because her son is, of course, the convicted man, the one who is believed to be innocent. The other one, the film doesn't really bother with him because he didn't put up much of a case. Jimmy initially just takes it as well. Everybody says they're innocent, don't they? If we let everybody out of prison that says I didn't do it, even after they've been convicted, then we'd have empty prisons. However, he starts to dig into it. Things start not to add up quite so nicely. The judge had told the convicts afterwards, boys, I'm not sure you actually did this, but the jury did, so got to send you up the Swanee. Things have gone missing. Police detectives were up to mischief. They moved the suspect around. He was interrogated for 2 days when it should have been done in hours if it was a clear-cut murder, these kind of things. And as Jimmy Stewart points out to the police, in that Untouchables era, if you will, in that St. Valentine's Day massacre at the time, the police were not very friendly because they were getting so much hassle. They had to be kind of mobsters themselves to take on the growing crime in Chicago. Before Prohibition, of course, was ended, and the gangsters were suddenly out of their main source of income, and most of them either retired, moved to Vegas, or were done for tax evasion like Al Capone. But Jimmy is our plucky reporter, and keeps on digging. Now this, again, being one of his lesser known, not, I don't think it's lesser, that's not fair, lesser known than his major works, but it's a known film. You know, if you're a Jimmy Stewart fan, you know Northside 777, but I think to a slightly more casual fan, it won't be known, so I'm not going to spoil how it progresses and what it all relies on, but it's quite fascinating. It's directed by the great Henry Hathaway, and for its time it's very documentary-like. It was promoted as such, as being almost documentary-like. It's not quite. Post-war, with Italian neorealism and things, the Rossellini films would see what that looks like in its truest form. Here we are a few years earlier. This is post-war, I should say, but you know, we're still in the studio system in Hollywood, so it's not going to be too Dogma 95, you know, cinema verite. But for Hollywood, with major star like Jimmy Stewart and a major director like Henry Hathaway, it's pretty grimy. And it's filmed on location in Chicago, the first film that was filmed on location up there in Illinois. And it gets labelled, including on the back of this box, as a film noir. It's not a film noir. I think sometimes lazily people think crime equals film noir. No, there's certain things that need to be involved in the story for it to be a noir. And Jimmy and Richard Conte's character are both too innocent and too naive to be noir characters. You can be naive and innocent in a noir, but you have to have something that's tempting you, fate, or you know, that dame that you can't resist. There has to be that element. But it's quite clear they're on the, you know, the good path from start to finish. So it's really just a crime film, but that's not to disparage. It's just you shouldn't put it in with the noir genre, just because it's a crime film made around that era. I think also the fact that Richard Conte is in it, who was, you know, up there with Robert Mitchum and the likes, and Richard Widmark is one of the great noir actors. So I think that kind of distorts it as well, but it's not a noir. Tangential, perhaps an inspiration in some noirs, but no, it's not noir. Jimmy Stewart's character is jaded at the start, but he's never cynical. He's just seen so many stories as a newsman come across his desk that, you know, another one, chief, you know, it's that kind of attitude. It's not, I don't believe you, he's a cop. You know, he's willing to follow the evidence from the very start. So there's never a sense that he's, you know, flipping on, letting this guy down, you know, for an easy ride, or he's in it with the police, or he can be intimidated. There's never a sense that Richard Conte really did it. Again, I'm not spoiling too much about how things progress, but you know, you never get that impression from the very start. So again, it doesn't meet any of the criteria of noir. There's no femme fatale. There are a couple of nasty people in it, but really it's just a case of miscarriage of justice type film. It's got more in common with something like Steven Spielberg's The Post. And that's quite funny because I mentioned that Spielberg yesterday with No Highway in the Sky. You could see a lot of that in Sully. So Clint Eastwood directed Sully. Yes, so Clint Eastwood directed Sully, and Spielberg directed this kind of in the future with The Post with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. You know, so I think I did say Spielberg yesterday, so excuse me. So essentially, what Eastwood with Sully and what Spielberg with The Post have done is kind of take these kinds of stories from back then, from their childhoods or youths, and kind of transpose them, flesh them out a lot more for the modern age, because it's almost exactly the same kind of film as The Post. They're not fighting for Watergate, but it's a similar kind of thing. They're having to make the same battles, they're having to fight the same fight. There's a little bit of, proto-President's Men in there as well. It's a good newspaper movie if you like the way that old news offices worked, and you like seeing the printing presses, and you like the early proto-fax machines they had. I can't remember what they call it, the paper, the photo phone or something. It's something funny like that, and it's quite fun to watch that actually transpire. But yeah, it's a really interesting film. It's well done, it's incredibly well made, and James Stewart's fantastic in it, which I feel like is getting a bit repetitive to say. When I've said in a couple of films he was miscast, I've said in a couple of films his character could have been fleshed out better, but here is one of his best performances. He is just post A Wonderful Life at this point, so he's trying very hard to shake off the oh, isn't he a nice boy persona. So he is a fully grown man here, literally and figuratively. He's not the G shucks, I'm just here to help type reporter. He doesn't sugarcoat things. He doesn't let the Polish mother down easy. He doesn't let the convict know I'm going to do everything for it. He plays everything close to his chest. He doesn't let himself get carried away. And in that regards, the poster art here is almost quite telling. It's as though he's keeping things to himself, and that is quite kind of how he plays it. It's quite a subdued performance. There's no great speechifying from him in the film. He doesn't have his Jefferson Smith moment. And that works to the film's advantage because it stops it from becoming too Hollywood and keeps the documentary full. And I think it's a well crafted film in a studio system that didn't always allow for craftsmen. But Henry Hathaway was one such filmmaker who could find a way to take a story, pull it from the headlines and put it on the screen in an interesting and compelling way while still remaining fundamentally true to the facts. And Jimmy is terrific as the reporter who, because he is played by Jimmy Stewart, you believe he'll do the right thing, but it's also a step in the direction for Jimmy where he is starting to play characters who aren't necessarily from the outset instantly likeable. They might have a little bit of, maybe a little bit rough around the edge. Even the way he talks to his wife is quite ahead of its time. It's not as dear and sweetheart and things like that as it was in previous films. It's a bit more modern. That he grabs her back and steals a kiss and things like that, which seems like nothing now. But when you've seen the 30s films where everything's prim and proper, they do still sleep in single beds, though. There's that concession to the Hays Code. But check it out if you haven't seen Call Northside 777, because it's just a damn good crime movie and a damn good press movie about good old-fashioned newspapers at their best, doing their damnedest to clear one person's name. You could see it the way the police do at some points, and indeed Richard Conte's character. And I noticed that your circulation figures are doing pretty well these days, while you make this case quite a public thing. So, maybe again 10-15 years later, certainly 25 years later, that would have been an aspect that would be played up a lot more. But in this, there's lip service paid to, but not much of that. Again, we're still in the 40s, so it's perhaps a little bit much to expect that. Plus, they were working from a true story, so they obviously didn't want to perhaps upset too many people, and they were asking the state of Chicago for the cooperation in filming permits and whatnot, so they probably didn't want to insult the judiciary too much, given that this was filmed just about 5 years after the events. So, a lot of people would still have been in office and things. So. And again, the names weren't changed terribly much. He's McNeil, but the original was like McCarthy. It's not a mad stretch. Wycheck, the arrested man, was Vorsky or something. The names have been very, very slightly altered and nothing more. But yep, highly recommend it. If you're a Jimmy Stewart fan, if you haven't seen it, it's a nice bridge from that early Jimmy Stewart. I keep saying the shucks and gee whiz, Jimmy, but you know the type I'm talking about, to the more cynical Anthony Mann era, which would only be a few years away. And I think tomorrow we will pick a western. I think we'll go with one of his westerns tomorrow, just see what happens with that. But well, nearly at the 15-minute mark, so thanks very much. Really enjoying this series myself, just getting to rewatch these films and sometimes build a better appreciation, and with a more critical eye, because I'm not just watching it for watching's sake. It's quite fun, evaluating influences and context that it was in at the time, context now. I'm looking at it from the point of view strictly of the Jimmy Stewart character, because it's Jimmy Stewart month. So yeah, I'm enjoying it, and I think a few of you are too, given the nice comments that have been left. So, another third of the way there, folks. Thanks very much once again. Just do me a favour. Stay very careful out there, For me, please. Love and mercy, my dears. Love and mercy.